Right, I'm going to start in 20 seconds. Okay, great. So hi, so thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. So just to say that I'm Najnin Islam, and we have some people from Bromley By Bow Centre joining us today, but we also have some link workers from the Waltham Forest Social Prescribing Scheme. So just a bit of background about today's webinar. Today is purely a pilot session of this training session that I'm developing as part of my role as Social Prescribing Training and Development Manager at the Bromley By Bow Centre. And so we decided like the biggest need at the moment is probably how to support vulnerable people over the phone in the COVID-19 crisis, especially since many of us are so used to the face-to-face support. That was probably the defining feature of social prescribing. We're really, really happy to have Waltham Forest social prescribing sort of link workers with us today. I'll just introduce you to the panel speakers that we're going to have later on today. So we have Layla Sheree from the Bromley By Bow Centre, who's a social prescribing service manager there. We have Barbara from the Waltham Forest social prescribing scheme, and we also have Hadrian, who is a volunteer at the Samaritans. And so we're looking forward to all that input today. Just some ground rules. You'll notice that all of you will be on mute, and then I think your webcams are also off as well. And those that will be speaking will then have their webcams off, so you'll be able to see us. Just to explain a little bit about GoToWebinar, it's also my first time using this, so please be patient with us. Again, it's a pilot run. So you'll see on your right hand side, there's this like grey tab thing. There should be at the very bottom, the two lowest tabs, there should be a questions tab and a chat tab. So you can ask questions within the question tab, and then there's a drop down box as well where you can sort of make sure that it goes to everyone rather than just the panelists. And then you can use a chat function to speak between yourselves, to discuss something, or equally, if for whatever reason you're not seeing the question function, you can ask the questions in the chat tab. We've scheduled this for 2 hours. I'm anticipating that we should be done by 1:45. So there'll be some online sort of talking points, some slides to go with it. And then there'll be a Q&A questions, and that's why it's really important. Please do ask any questions that you have, or if it's just clarifying questions. And then Leanna, who's also the London NHS England Regional Learning Coordinator, will be at hand to sort of collate those questions on our behalf. So we'll just get started with the slides. Right, so just bear with me. Okay, so can you guys all see the next slide? Apologies, bear with me. There we go. So these are the sessions that the objectives that we're going to cover today. So understand what social prescribing link worker role is in the COVID-19 crisis, understanding the relevant information to collect and collate during a call, and what to record, and understand the importance of knowing your safeguarding and suicide prevention policies. And there'll be some practical tips on that as well, just to say that this is not a mental health first aid training, and this is not a suicide prevention training. It's just to give a little bit background support when you're doing your telephone consultations. And then just general knowledge of best practice of telephone support in the COVID-19 crisis, and we'll hear more from Barbara from Waltham Forest.
Najnin, could I just interject. I don't think that your slides are moving here.
Ah, okay. Hold on. Can you see them now? Leanna, can you see it now?
That's the working remotely and what to have prepared slide. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay, so just to say, those are the 4 objectives that we'll cover, and then we're going to now move on to working remotely and what to have prepared for your assessment appointment. So there might be some issues. I understand that some of you might not have a work phone, and that's definitely a challenge. So if that's still an issue, please do contact Leanna, because I think NHS England is aware of this issue, and we are trying to get that issue sorted out. If you do have a work phone or whatever phone you're using, just make sure it's fully charged. And if you are, for whatever reason, using a personal phone, I know it's not ideal, but use 141 before you dial the number. And so making sure that you might have your remote access. I know some of you do have EMIS Anywhere laptops, or if you're on System 1, you might have the VPN tokens. But I know for most of you probably don't have that right now. And so in that case, it's just making sure that you have the safety net of protection. So if there is a suicide, somebody with suicidal thoughts, or there's a safeguarding issue, you have the right contact numbers or the email addresses at hand. So maybe understand who the daily on-call doctors are, and who the safeguarding leads are, and if you do need any support from clinical directors or line managers. Be very familiar with your safeguarding protocols and suicide prevention protocols for remote working and over the phone. So they might be a bit different to how they are face-to-face, obviously, especially if you're in a clinic setting. You would probably just approach the on-call doctor, and then if you don't have remote access, you can't screen message or task the GPs. So just making sure that you follow all the protocols, and they might be the order of things might be different. And obviously, if you feel like a patient over the phone is in immediate danger, please do call emergency services. Right. So we're just on the next slide now. So what do I need to record? So this slide is mainly for the social prescribing link workers. So please ensure that you code all referrals on EMIS or System 1 with the SNOMED codes. And so it's really, really important that you use the SNOMED code referral to social prescribing. What this does is that it allows for NHS England to monitor the amount of people that are coming through. So it monitors the needs, and to some extent it monitors the impact of the service as well. Obviously, with the new DES contract changes, the primary care networks are going to be paid on referral. So this is really important to code for that reason as well. If you don't have access to remote patient files on EMIS or System 1, then it might be worth just making sure that on your spreadsheet that the appropriate codes are being used. It might be that on a weekly basis or a daily basis at the end of the day that you contact the individual practices to have them coded. So if you are using an Excel spreadsheet, and if you have your own assessment questions, making sure that they align with your Excel spreadsheet. In terms of what else is useful, recording the needs required by the patients, and then also the time spent. So it allows for you to adjust your caseload, but also, this is the first time that most of us doing a crisis service, and actually recording that information is quite valuable. There might be another pandemic in the future, who knows, but it's really valuable information to collect, and obviously have a column for your summary notes. Right, we're just moving on to the next slide. There's been a big sort of conversation about what we do with outcome measurements. So NHS England originally have encouraged the use, so it's not mandatory prior to the COVID-19 crisis, to use the patient activation measure, which we call as PAM, or the ONS4 wellbeing scales. And they have said that you can use additional sort of outcome measures alongside that. So obviously in a crisis situation, the outcome measurements might not be appropriate. So this is what NHS England have indicated. They've indicated that the SNOMED codes take priority. So that's an absolute essential when you're recording referrals. Again, to measure impact and the benefits of social prescribing. Ideally, where possible, you would use PAM and ONS for if that's what your primary care networks and your commissioners are asking you to do. But obviously, it might not be appropriate and it might not be possible. And so just to say, the ONS4 questions therefore might, because they're shorter, less invasive, well, to some extent, it might be encouraged to use the ONS4 for the lower burden patients. And if you have any questions on outcomes, please use the chat and the question panel on the side. Okay, so we're just going to go over a brief structure of a telephone assessment sort of call that you might have. And so I will pull up the telephone script, which we'll be referring to in just a moment. So this is just an overall structure, just making sure that we have a meet and greet. So when you're face to face, you know, those first 2 minutes are really essential. And so it's equally as important over the phone, if not more, making sure that you say your name and what you do, because actually, especially the shielding list and the vulnerable people, they might be you know, getting calls from quite a few people, and so therefore understanding who you are and what you do is really imperative at this stage. So capturing the overall picture, so this is where you would collate all your relevant information. What would you need for you to support the person over the phone? And then there might be some exploring options for support. And then for your lower level need patients, it might be that, you know, there's an element of encouraging healthy behaviours at home, such as online exercise videos, etc. And then developing a plan. So there should be brief summary notes and some action points for either yourself to do or the patient to do. And then making sure that you end the telephone appointment where they feel like they know what's going to happen. I'm just going to bring up the telephone script. Bear with me. Right. So everyone should hopefully be able to see the telephone script right now. For some reason, I can't see it now. There we go. Okay. Leanna or Berenice, just let me know if you can't see the template. And so we're just going to scroll down this Word document. So as I said, the first 1 minute should really be clarifying who you are, what your role is, and what you're there to do, basically. So you can just see in the italics, this is just, you know, you don't really have to follow the script word to word, adapt it to how it feels natural to you. So this one just goes on to say what their link worker function is. So I know that in different schemes, they're having a tiered approach. So some of the link workers are responding as core respondents to the crisis, and so only dealing with the shielding list. So that's the most extremely vulnerable, the 1.5 million that the government have identified. Or you know, you might just be focusing as business as usual, the lower level need patients. So therefore clarifying what that role that you'll be doing over the phone. Understanding, giving them an understanding of how much time you have on the call. So really clarifying the time that you're going to have and clarifying when the call will end, so that you know, you understand, and there's some boundary setting as well. A brief explanation of what your service and what you will be doing, and if you are expected to do an outcome measure, that's where you would, you know, almost give them some preparation, that there will be a short survey of some sort. Really, they should really feel more of a guided conversation, but usually your first telephone call, that assessment might feel like a bit of a question answer, and so it's just making sure that you give them that notice, like, you know, that I'm going to be asking quite a few questions, but it's also that I can support you, and please do feel free to ask questions in between. Going over confidentiality, and also clarifying duty of care and how you're going to be recording notes, because there are some people have actually asked link workers if they're working from home and how if their data is secure. And obviously, if you are a link worker, if you are sort of subcontracted, then you might need to have separate consent clarifying at the very beginning of the call. So now, collating the information needed for your summary plans of the needs. So these are a list of some relevant questions that you might find helpful. So just understanding, how are they managing during this difficult time? It might be that they are quite vulnerable, but actually they have quite a lot of support available through different streams. So that can be quite helpful for you to manage your caseload. It might be helpful for me to understand your current routine, and that might make you aware of where their needs are, and also whether they're actually following social distancing guidelines. Understanding what the biggest concerns that they have right now. Is there anybody at home that can also help? Or, if they're part of the shielding list, do they have family members that drop things off for them, or friends or neighbours? So understanding what support there is for them at the moment, and then the deficit support that they would probably need for you to fill the gap. And if they are extremely vulnerable, it's just making sure that they have signed up to gov.uk, and you might want to clarify whether they're actually receiving all the support, like the food parcels. And so what support do you need from us? So it might be that they're quite clear on what they need, and it could be 1, 2, or a number of things that they need. So you can just see when we're scrolling down, it might just be that they just need some comfort calls. They might just need some advice on how to stay healthy at home, or that they have some hospital appointments or need a blood test or a GP appointment. They might need to go post mail. They might have additional caring responsibilities. They might just need welfare support, or just some online digital support as well, and asking them what other additional support they might need. So these will be the main assessment questions. So the assessment questions can be divided into maybe 3 or 4 areas. So medical history, again, just to keep this brief, but it can be quite useful to clarify symptoms as well. Then there's social history, so really understanding what the social situation is like at home, and actually how socially vulnerable they are. Then their financial and welfare support, and then any general support. So it could be, whether they have access to Wi-Fi, and we'll just go through this now. So with medical history, keep this brief. It might be that, they do have a long-term condition and symptoms are getting worse. So it might be that you need to flag that back to the GP or the relevant healthcare professional. And so if you also feel like there's some COVID-19 sort of issues, then it might be worthwhile to focus on the following questions, like whether they need medication and are they able to access medication? Do they need support from any other healthcare professionals in the wider primary care team or the community teams, like district nurses, dietitians, the incontinency service? And do they currently have any symptoms of COVID-19? And then just making sure if they do, or if they're unsure, that you reiterate the self-isolation guidance, reiterate the signs and all the symptoms associated, where they can go for further help and information, and what to do if your health condition deteriorates. So obviously NHS 111 would be the first point of contact for any COVID-19 symptoms, but it's also making sure that you stay up to date with the latest guidance, because things seem to be changing on a day-to-day basis. If there is any confusion about what the latest guidance is, we can send you those links, and I would really encourage you to join the Future Collaboration platform, where, as far as I'm aware, all the latest guidance all the documents are on that platform, and there's a big network of link workers and support, so definitely do join that. And are they self-isolating due to COVID-19 symptoms? And are they aware of the latest guidance, and reiterating all those? So social history, what would that look like? So are they living alone? Are they in a household with, with different intergenerations? So that in itself is a risk, especially with the COVID-19 symptoms and how it's transmitted. Are there any dependents or any other vulnerable adults or dependents in the property? Do they have a support network, whether that's through neighbours, family or friends? And what is the housing situation like? And are they at risk of homelessness? So I guess this is more of if they're in arrears, in debt, are they a private tenant? Because I think now the biggest risk is more for private tenants where their landlords are giving them notice to leave the property, especially those that are NHS staff or aren't working at the moment and they can't make rent meet. And so therefore really understanding what welfare support agencies you have at hand, which leads nicely onto the financial and the welfare support that your patients might need. So really clarifying any arrears or debt that they're in because of the COVID-19 situation or even before that. Are they eligible for financial support? So it could be that they're and possibly a new applicant of universal credit. We're aware that there's in the last 2 weeks, I think alone, there was up to 500,000 new applicants for universal credit, and that's obviously going to have a big impact on the system and possibly whether they get paid on time. So clarifying if they are eligible or if they are already on universal credit or if they're on any of the legacy benefits, so that's the pre-universal credit benefits. So has there been a recent change in household income? Because if there is, especially if they've been furloughed or they can't work because of symptoms and they're self-isolating, they may need to notify, if they are on universal credit, the universal credit journal, or they might have to fill out a form on the local authority website. This is just more general information where it might be better where you just then pass that on to the welfare agencies or any welfare services that you usually refer on to, and checking that they're receiving all their welfare payments, just to give you an understanding of actually how vulnerable they are. Do they have access to online or telephone banking, which can sometimes make it easier for them to make budgets when they are spending on or ordering food? Do they have access to the right food supplies? As mentioned earlier, if you know that you're contacting the shielding group, are they receiving the gov.uk food parcels, where just from our experience, actually a lot of the food parcels aren't being received, despite them being registered on gov.uk 2 weeks ago. So it's good to monitor that. Have they been recently furloughed? That's going to have a big impact on household income and therefore the financial impact of the household. So are they able to keep up with mortgage, rent, utility bills? I've heard of lots of welfare support agencies talking about, like, there's smaller organisations that are providing vouchers for utility bills. So that will be obviously really helpful. There might be just some additional general questions that might be really useful, like do they have access to Wi-Fi? Are they sort of IT digital competent? Do they have a phone that supports WhatsApp or other apps? Because that might then have an impact on how you then support somebody post call. And if there are any safeguarding issues, obviously that's relevant to the call or not. So this can be picked up in either the conversation and might need some probing questions from you. And if they have revealed suicidal thoughts or harmful thoughts, obviously just following your protocols. Within all of this, it's just making sure that you check in and keep an eye on time. And so that's why it's really important that you clarify how much time you have at the beginning of the call. So when you're ending the consultation, maybe have that final sort of dip in of like, okay, we have about 5 to 10 minutes left of our call, and I want to thank you for taking the time in speaking with me. And so this is where it's probably quite useful to provide a brief summary of what you've discussed and list the action points here. So, it's checking in that you're both on the same page, and there's no misunderstandings. And then check to confirm that they understand what you will be doing. So all the onward referrals possibly that you're going to be making, or researching any support that they might need, and that you'll get back to them if that's the case. Another important thing to clarify when you're ending the consultation is, can they contact you outside of the sessions that you have, or this outside of this phone call that you're going to have, and if so, when and in what circumstances? So it might be that you're actually using your personal phone and they can't, and so that might make them more anxious, but then it's just a matter of you providing details of what the appropriate support and what they would need to do if their circumstances change. Obviously a follow-up, you should be having follow-ups with your patients, but that would depend on your capacity and therefore prioritizing your caseload. And obviously there's the shielding list alone, and then there's the vulnerable lists, and then there's just those that are socially vulnerable. So it's a huge number of people that are really affected by this, and just you might be inundated with referrals or just going through your patient lists, and so really understanding how you would prioritize your call, and that's why it's probably quite good to monitor how long your calls take. So it might be quite useful just to have your appointment list to hand at the end of the appointment. And then just making sure that you also ask them whether they have any questions for you. They might just need some reassurance that things are gonna, that you're gonna access the support, or that you're gonna try and contact the right support for them. There might also be some confusion that they've received a letter, or they've received another call from another volunteer service, and just clarifying who those support agencies are. And so if you do book up a follow-up, making sure that they're aware of when that will be, and whether they'll get a text reminder of some sort. And then making sure that you record all relevant information, whether that's on your spreadsheet. I know some people are using paper documents, and if that's so, then please store them as your primary care network guidance or your organisational guidance. So ideally, that generally means locked up in a sealed sort of like bag, in a safe place, in a lockable cupboard ideally. And making sure that it's quite clear of the name and the patient and the NHS number details, brief summary points of discussion, action points, and any other relevant sort of information that might be important, such as safeguarding and your outcomes. And so that's the telephone script. I'm just going to go back to the slides, just bear with me. Right, can Leanna, or Berenice, can you see the slides? Let me go to the chat. Yeah, I think you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry, the structure of the telephone assessment and appointment.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry. And so that telephone script should hopefully then be sort of tailored against this telephone assessment structure. So bulk of it, the telephone script that you just saw on the Word document, will be the capturing the overall picture, and then then you can, depending on what the crisis is or what sort of support that you're able to give, you could explore the options for supports for the lower level needs, or just even if it is a crisis, a very immediate crisis support, it's just understanding that they know what you're going to refer on to. So whether you're using the NHS volunteers, the Good Sam app, understanding that they're going to receive a call from somebody, and it's going to be this organisation. And then developing a plan for yourself, and then obviously those summary notes should ideally be sent back to your practices, if you don't have remote access, or on your EMIS or System 1 notes, just so everyone's aware of what your intervention has been. And then ending the telephone appointment, which we just went through. So being aware of your and understanding safeguarding and suicidal prevention policies and procedures. It's really imperative that you understand and you know what the protocols are, because we are aware of link workers that have come across this, being on the phone in the office. And so I'm just going to let you think about this one sentence. Just have a read of it, and then think about, how do you feel about this and what you might say in response. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to read this. Right, so the reason why I've chosen this sentence, and this is actually a sentence that was actually said by a patient, it's thinking about how they've said the words that make you maybe feel that there's an element of risk there, or the tone that they've said it in. So if they've just said it quite, in a blasé tone, like there's so much to do and think of, oh, I just, the kids, I have to work from home, I can't leave the house, just can't take it anymore. But if they're saying it in a tone where you're concerned, it's obviously going to change the action plan and the support that they might need. So if they're saying, I just can't take it anymore, you do need to probe into that a little bit more. So really thinking about, really being mindful rather of what words they're using, what their tone is, and being mindful of the background noises as well. So if somebody does say that they have active suicidal thoughts, so that means that they've said, I want to kill myself or hurt myself, making sure that you keep calm, talk about it, don't ignore it. I'm hoping most of you will have either suicide prevention training, or in the form of is this suicide prevention or mental health first aid, and if you don't, then will be, I think, Leanna, your regional learning coordinator for London, is following up on how we can get mental health first aid over the phone for all link workers in London. And really, okay, so even if you think somebody said something jokingly like, oh, I just want to kill myself, in a really blasé tone, just making sure that you address that to make sure that it's not, said in jest. So are these fleeting thoughts? If they are active, if they have said it's an active thought, do they have a plan, and what do they intend to do after the call? I think it's really important that obviously they've shared this information with you and they didn't have to, so really thank them for sharing this information with you and explain what you will be doing with the information that they've been telling you, because obviously it's a duty of care to notify the right healthcare professionals. So you can make sure you record the information, and if they have used specific words like how they intend to hurt themselves, making sure that you pick up on those words as well. And then you might want to give them the Samaritan's number or a local suicide prevention number, or you might have a crisis support number, a mental health support crisis number in your local areas, and understanding maybe just having those at hand when you are making calls. Discuss with your line manager, supervisor, and report it to the GP. Obviously, if you have remote access, you can screen message, or you can task the doctor, the on-call duty doctor. If you don't, then make sure that you have their contact numbers and their NHS email contact numbers so that you can get them the right support immediately. And then if you feel like a patient is in immediate danger, obviously call emergency services. and also really understand what your procedures are. So if there are steps that you have to take beforehand, or if there's a certain person that you have to contact before any of this, then just follow whatever your procedure is. The main thing is that you really understand what that procedure is. With all of this, I think it's really, really important that you understand that, you know, you must think about your own well-being. You're making these calls, probably like at the very least sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 calls a day. You're listening to really intense, you know, dealing with really intense conversations, and you yourself are also socially isolated because we're all working from home or working remotely, or, you know, socially distanced. And so it's just being mindful that you have boundaries in place for yourself as well. I know of link workers that are working at 6, 7 p.m. in the evening. Please don't do that. And if there is issues with workload, make sure that you bring that up with your line manager. So think about peer support groups. You might have your local WhatsApp groups, or your local, your team WhatsApp groups. Really utilize them, even if it is sometimes quite useful just to have a complaining session. That in itself is just therapeutic. And then join the Future Collaboration platform. There's a big network of link workers across England there, and actually most of the questions that are raised are actually addressed by another link worker. So I would really stress that you join that platform. Take time to reflect and ensure that you have mini breaks, or set the boundaries of like, this is your working hours and that's what you're going to do. We are hopefully also going to be developing pilot sessions, or some development of some training that involves peer supervision. That's all in development phases, but I will keep you guys updated. And so this is more of a sort of exercise that you guys can do after the webinar or sometime next week. You can either use, you know, Microsoft Teams or WhatsApps. What the homework is basically in groups of 3, maybe just have a go at sort of being one person being a link worker, one person being the patient, and one as an observer. So the observer is just there to pick up on what the tone is, what the language that you're using, what the pace of language that you're using, and picking up on any relevant sort of positive things that you're doing as a link worker. It's really great to understand actually how you sound over the phone, and we don't know that, so actually having an observer there can be really useful. And then making sure that you all have turns to play that role, so that might take up to like 20 minutes each, and you can rotate that. So that's, you know, you don't have to do this, but I think it's really useful. And so now I'm just going to hand over to Barbara, who's going to talk about some best practice and in her experience of being a social prescriber in Waltham Forest. So I'll just hand you over to Barbara.
Thank you,
Hi,
Natalie.
Barbara. No worries.
Hello. Yeah, so I would like to speak first of all, maybe to share some of best practice of telephone social prescribing, because as you might know, we in Waltham Forest, we've been always set up as a telephone social prescribing service only. So really, even pre-COVID-19 world, that was the way we did all the contacts, interactions with the clients, with the patients. So yeah, so there are some clear advantages that we were able to find out very early on, because we were only a telephone service. We would have much wider groups of people refer to us. So people who might be housebound for whatever reason, either their age or extreme anxiety or really disability, people who wouldn't have that maybe initial motivation or ability to go and meet you face to face. So from that point of view, you know, telephone social prescribing can be seen as a bit of a kind of a easier thing for a client, because all the other barriers they might have, either physical or really internally. We've had people with problems with their body image, we've had people with extreme anxiety, and this, if you think about it, this actually creates some more level playing field for the client and for you as a social prescriber, because you are not that person inviting them to your environment, to come to your GP practice and meet you, where you are kind of in control of the environment, and where it can actually help you. But it's just such voice over the phone that is there. And we actually been able to reach some people who were really isolated already pre the crisis, and maybe we've been the only person they've had that contact with. So that's relevant, obviously, for whichever list of clients you will be contacting in this situation. I know it varies. Some of them will be extremely vulnerable on the NHS who received a letter, or some other socially vulnerable patients identified by your GP practice. So that was another advantage, really, I would say, and probably slight change from doing an assessment first contact face-to-face, is it does create a safe space for the person to open up to you, maybe more than they would open up if you were to meet up first time. And it really depends on your active listening skills, how you create that space for them to open up. So actually what we've been going with in Waltham Forest, maybe we didn't have such a comprehensive list of questions that Najnin went through previously, because you have to be conscious that creating that safe conversational space over the phone, there's a balance about how many questions to ask for it not to that you find out all the necessary facts, so you can cover safeguarding, practical support, emotional, mental health support, but not to overwhelm the person with questions. So if I am to share our best practice, we would really encourage person to talk and maybe take notes, because really a lot of those facts that you need to find out about a person, about a situation, they can simply tell you, if you give them that space. So really note taking and maybe having that that script is obviously very useful to have at hand, but let it flow naturally if possible. So another thing is that we found out that people actually very quickly just were able to get into quite really mental health side of things, telling us how they feel, how things are difficult. So really kind of this trust building can be actually fast tracked in a way if you use telephone social prescribing. So there were some challenges, obviously, that I'm sure you will come across with if you don't have that booked appointment, and you might not get through to the person. So one of the challenges we've identified, obviously, is you can't get hold of the person. And then there's always question, how do I leave a message, let them know, because a lot of our client group wouldn't have things like, access to voicemail feature or even text messages. You're working with some extremely vulnerable, socially deprived groups, so people often don't have credit to call you back if you leave them a message or text. or sometimes they wouldn't answer the phone because of the extreme anxiety they might have around somebody calling them. So that there are just some things to consider, that, you know, if you have use of work mobile phone, ideally trying to use different channels and maybe pre-booking the telephone call via text message, voicemail, and basically just trying all the functions that you can, remembering that these people might not be able to really maybe read or listen to that voicemail. So persevering, really. In terms of, you know, looking at how to build that relationship over the phone when it's really just your voice and other person's voice, it's really there are some simple tips to observe, to follow, to make sure that that person knows you're there. So really just some minimal encouragers. You know, we can't smile at people, we can't encourage them by our body language, and we know it's such a big part of our communication. But in telephone conversation, it's good always that they know we are at the other end of the telephone line, just by saying, yes, tell me more, you know. And maybe if you think about your tools that you use for active listening, when you reflect back, when you encourage people to tell you more, when you summarize things, in this telephone scenario, it's maybe making it a bit more brief. Maybe just reflecting one word sounds difficult, you know, or tell me more. So using, not being scared to maybe enter into or interrupt if you can't maybe follow, because people might be actually quite talkative and be sharing the whole story. And if you need to check facts, just pause and ask them, check the understanding that you know exactly what they are talking about. Yeah, so in Waltham Forest, obviously we are in a slightly different situation. My colleagues are now joined in, but they only just are starting in the PCNs, and really the situations varies from PCN to PCN and from practice to practice. So what you can see on the screen now is actually a script that we developed in Waltham Forest, really as a kind of a very work in progress response to the current situation, which this was produced end of last week. I think maybe it's already, you know, this is, as we know, it's a constantly evolving world where even, you know, the groups of people who are referred to as social prescribers can change on a daily basis. So this is, if we look at the first page, really similar, you know, taking similar to script that Narjanin presented here. It's really kind of keeping the basic structure so people know who you are, you explain their role, and obviously in terms of practical support or safeguarding, checking if they have access to bare necessities that we all need now as we are all self-isolating. Nadine, can I ask you to scroll down, please? Yeah, and so we have just yes, so you would see we have a kind of a simple flow chart where we're checking if a person is actually in a vulnerable group and they're missing some of the essentials. But then this is something we are yet to test, to tell you. So in terms of obviously we realize it's a great opportunity, hopefully a one-off opportunity with a pandemic, but nevertheless to collect the data about to have some measures, really some evaluation. So we are suggesting here using micro scales. So if you, Nathan, please scroll down a bit more, this you will see is might be familiar to you. Just, you know, encouraging a person to tell you about one or two main concerns and trying to capture the scale, how that problem might be for them, because I think you will find even in this COVID-19 world that, you know, people might be workless or, you know, just about struggling with food, but they will actually tell you that the most important thing for them is that they haven't seen their children for 3 weeks, you know, or something else, you know. So there's kind of, we will see how we are still yet to test it, but we'll see how it actually translates into people giving us a better picture of what they live through really in this world, and what their individual concerns might be in a situation that is in one way very, very similar for all of us. But of course, we know that there are big differences for everyone. I think if we just scroll to the end of the last page, Najmin, please. Thank you. Yeah, so it is, so you will see we kind of we're thinking more in terms, you know, of the areas of concerns or problems that people might come up with, and try to group them in some categories. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, and we will be building up the resources to address and provide linking for the clients to each of these areas of concern they might have. Just really, I would reiterate that, you know, in your telephone work, it is really that immediate relief that you're providing to a very vulnerable person. And as Najmin said, you know, it might be people who are on extremely clinically vulnerable lists. So people who really are extremely isolated. So, you know, I hope that can be some kind of encouragement and really confidence building for you, because you are that kind of agent, that person making that live contact from person to person. And there might not be outcomes at the end of, you know, you find out that a person is already maybe linked to a local mutual aid group or food bank, you know, but that focus on mental health and mental well-being is something that's been mentioned in all the discussions we all been having in social prescribing world in the last 2-3 weeks. So really, it is that immediate relief and contact that you provide to that person, which really is something, yeah, to value and remember as you know, as part of your skills and part of your role really. I would say the suggestion for role playing is really useful, because for telephone work, it's really your voice that is your main tool. So I'm sure you all use your empathy skills very well in your previous roles, in your current roles, but it is about, you know, thinking maybe a bit more about the tone of voice, the pace, trying, you know, you are there kind of to hold and hug them with your voice, if you like. You know, it's maybe not a very technical term, but I think this association of, you know, creating that soft, warm, calm atmosphere with your voice is very important, and really taking the time, which hopefully, because now you're working from home, I mean, for me personally, we were based in a busy office with social workers, and at times it has been really very hectic and noisy, and even making a phone call and you try to connect with the person and give them space, perhaps, you know, this remote working home environment creates naturally a bit better conditions for you to really take the time and slow down with pace and create that right conditions for the person to open up and get some comfort from your call as well. And just very briefly to finish off, we, as I said, this is in Waltham Forest, we are very much on a starting line with our fantastic new team of social prescribing link workers in GB practices. But we've been able to support each other. We keep in touch. There's a peer support WhatsApp group. We are in touch via emails, also on Microsoft Teams. We share lots of resources and documents, and we also have regular video meetings where yeah, we can join up. So really look after yourself, and as you know, part of it is trying to keep in touch with your peers, and perhaps, you know, as Najim said, there will be difficult calls. There will be difficult calls, and you might really need to take, or it's good to really kind of remember to take a mini break after each call and just have maybe a few minutes to reflect and then connect with your peers in whichever way you can. Maybe just dropping an email or something, posting on your WhatsApp group. It does really help. It helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. That was so helpful. And so now I'm just going to hand you over to Hadrian, and I'm just going to bear with me, Hadrian.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Right. So there you go. I'll hand you over now.
So hi, yeah, my name's Hadrian. I've been a Samaritans volunteer for almost 3 years now, and I just want to talk a little bit first about the approach that the Samaritans take to suicide prevention, and then move on to talk a little bit about how we support our callers to explore the hard emotional topics that might come up, such as suicide. So our approach to prevention is shaped very much by the way the service works, which is that it's anonymous, the calls are untraceable, the caller will call us, and we are essentially strangers who they will likely never talk to again. So our service provides a confidential, non-judgmental call to anyone in emotional distress, and we are very clear that we do not provide advice of any kind. The approach is founded on the belief that if someone has someone to listen to them and is able to say out loud things that they may not have said before, they may not feel quite so alone with their problems, and that can relieve some of the pressure of their situation. It can create a bit of a breathing space and a better chance for them to find their way through it, obviously with us there to listen for as long as they need us over time. Because we're unable to intervene without a caller's permission, this does mean that if someone is determined to take their own life, we will simply stay with them while they do it, and if that's what they wish to do, while making it clear throughout the call that what they would need to do if they were to change their minds, and make sure that they know that they can call an ambulance at any time, or if they gave their address, we could call it for them. So how you all approach suicide prevention will likely be very different because of the different natures of what you're offering. But the methods we use to explore suicides and other hard topics with our callers can still be used and applied by you too. We combine active listening techniques that I understand you're already familiar with something we call the stepped approach. Before we take a call, we also have to bear in mind that our callers are in emotional distress, but not all are necessarily suicidal. While some will want to disclose, others will not necessarily have called us wanting to talk about suicide specifically or some aspects of their situation. So our job is to explore what's causing them distress and to explore if suicide is on their mind. So we do this through open questions, lots of them, by not shying away from the hard topics that might come up and the hard questions that we might need to ask them, but mostly by just being empathetic, curious, and caring. The stepped approach refers to using the open questions to explore how someone is feeling by asking for a little bit more detail from them each time, but bit by bit and slowly, rather than directly asking someone, are you suicidal? So instead we would work up slowly and carefully to that question. And by doing it in this sort of gradual approach, we also make sure that we avoid incorrect assumptions that might cause offense to the callers. Our questions will always focus on how someone is feeling once we have established their circumstances, and we will always keep directing the conversation back to this, as it gives them as many opportunities to disclose as possible, and it gives us as many opportunities as possible to explore what they're feeling in more depth. For example, and this came up in the example earlier that Najneen went through, if someone says, I just don't see the point anymore, as Najneen pointed out, that could be taken in many different ways and it could mean many different things. It would be something that I would note and follow up on with a question, either right there and then or maybe a little bit later, just to say, when you said that you don't see the point anymore, what did you mean by that? And see where the conversation leads. And as Najneen said, it could end up that they're just feeling overwhelmed, or it could mean that they have a plan to take their own life, and you don't know until you explore further. But that said, it's so important not to rush, giving them the space and the time to talk at their own speed and on their own terms. Silence is definitely not a bad thing. We have this tendency to when there's a silence, just to fill it because we feel uncomfortable with it. But becoming comfortable with those silences and leaving them for the caller to fill. In most cases, they're just thinking. So leaving them to just start talking again when they're ready is usually best. If you can get to the end of the call with having asked less questions than any other call, then that's a good outcome. It's good to get where you need to be with as few questions about these hard topics as possible, but while still properly exploring it. If you're not used to talking about these topics, it really can be hard at first to get past your initial resistance to it. One thing we tell ourselves is that people won't like to be asked about it. But in reality, what we find is that for callers, it can be such a relief to have someone ask you what no one else will. And if the caller chooses not to answer a question, that's fine. But we feel it is more important that they know that there is someone there that they can talk to about those things if they want to. Sometimes you will find that you aren't able to explore a topic to your satisfaction for whatever reason, either because you run out of questions, you've asked them all before and they haven't really answered or gone much further with what they've been saying, or the caller is done talking about that topic. In this case, we would take a note and possibly return to it later in the call if we can. But also you can reflect and summarize what they've said back to them. And this can sometimes give an opportunity for them to correct your understanding or to disclose further if they wish. And then once you've done all of that, once you've explored all those topics, you'll obviously know, hopefully, everything that's going on for a caller, and that is when any safeguarding or suicide prevention procedures that Najneen talked about earlier would come in. So that is, in brief, how we approach our conversations with callers. But a very large part of our training as Samaritans that I can't cover in 10 minutes is how each volunteer explores their individual attitudes and opinions on suicide. And after that process, to essentially set all of those opinions and attitudes aside. There are so many different reasons for people to feel the way that they do. And our job is to find out what is going on for that person in their own words. If you do have personal experience of suicide or other things that might come up in calls, I would say that it's very important to talk about this with your team beforehand so that you're as prepared as can be if it does come up. One other thing I will say is that sometimes things come up for us that surprise us or bring up emotions that are unexpected. In those cases, we will always debrief with another volunteer to explore why that is. The support we give each other as volunteers is a huge part of the reason that we can carry on doing the job. Lastly, you can always give people the Samaritan's number, and Najneen obviously said that that's on your signposting list. And you can give that number if you feel they will need or benefit from talking to us. Lots of people think that we only talk to suicidal people, but in fact, we take calls from anyone who is in emotional distress of any kind. It may be useful if you feel like they wanted to talk for longer on your call, but you run out of time, to be able to give them us as a place that they can go to and carry on that conversation. We regularly get calls from people who tell us we are the first person that they have told about how they are feeling, and that anonymity plays a large part in them feeling able to do so. I hope that they will feel the same way on calls with you, but if the Samaritans can help to start that conversation, we see that as a really valuable way to encourage further engagement with services such as yours. So, yeah, that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That was really, really helpful. Some really useful information for all our workers on the front line. So I think now I'm just going to hand you over to Layla Shrey, who is our social prescribing service manager. I am just going to, there you go. Layla, can you hear us? Oh, great. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, you can see me, right? Hi guys, thanks for that, Najneen. I guess I'm just not gonna be talking for long. I think Barbara's captured a lot of actually what we were talking about in terms of like providing telephone support. I guess I'm just going to be sort of talking about some of the reflections that we've found at the Bromley By Bow social prescribing service. I think like for everybody at the moment, we're kind of have changed the way that we've had to work, and now we're working in more of a crisis setting. A lot of the referrals that we're getting in from our practices are largely urgent and sort of crisis related referrals. A lot of the referrals and signposting that we're making is for sort of food related support. But I think it was quite good to mention some of the reflections that me and the team have had, because we've been making quite a few calls over the last 2 weeks. And one thing that we kind of were talking about was, when speaking to people, kind of acknowledging that things are different. You know, there's a lot going on at the moment that can kind of instill a lot of anxiety and fear in people. And so it's really important that when you're having these sessions with the clients, that you're acknowledging this and you're actually building space in the session to talk about any anxiety that they might have regarding COVID-19. I think just over the last 2 days, what's been really interesting actually is that a lot of the calls that I've been making, a lot of the clients have had a spike in this anxiety, and a lot of it has been to do with actually the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, going into intensive care. And I think just having something like that happen has kind of made people sort of sit up and realise that, you know, things are really bad at the moment. And so it's just acknowledging and recognising that for a lot of people, this may be the only chance that they get to speak to somebody about it. So making sure to bring that up during the session. I think secondly, another thing that we've kind of reflected on as a team is, although we're providing sort of crisis support at the moment, it's still important to be able to provide a space for people to kind of reflect. I think what happens is there's a tendency that when you're dealing with a crisis to kind of deal with that immediate thing that's going on. And so it's really important that we don't lose any of our active listening skills, and that we're being more attentive to the nuances of people's speech. And I think it's even more important now to be able to do that when you're talking to people over the phone. I think another thing that we were doing was making sure, it's really important for us as a team, that we were saying not to let go of that structure that we have when we're doing face-to-face sessions. And I think this is particularly when it comes to things like contracting and keeping to time. And I think something like the telephone script that sort of Najni's been talking about, and some of the stuff that Barbara's been talking about as well, is really useful actually. And, you know, it helps us to understand sort of what the patient needs are, and it gives us kind of like, it gives us some sort of clarity and structure to the sessions that we're having. And so using that as a guide has been really useful for us actually as a team. So thanks for that, Najnin. And another thing is just, I guess when we're doing face-to-face conversations with people, we're quite lucky in the sense that a lot of our understanding and communication comes from sort of our visual cues and our body language. And because when we're talking on the telephone, we suddenly have a lack of this sort of our body language prompts and cues. And so I think for us, it's just making sure that we're checking in with people during that session, just to make sure that they understand what's going on, or giving them a chance to actually speak if they want to. And I think another thing that we were talking about is, what we've found is that acknowledging that there are going to be some really vulnerable clients out there who are dealing with things such as domestic violence at the moment. And something like socially isolating is going to be extremely challenging for them. And I think it's just making sure that when you are taking the call, that you're making sure that they're safe, making sure that it's an appropriate time to call them, making sure that they have the chance to speak privately as well. And I think lastly, what we were talking about was actually our own well-being, so the well-being of the link workers. I think during the last 2 weeks, we've been sort of dealing with some really challenging clients and challenging situations, and that can be really hard for the link worker. And I think especially for the link workers in our team who live locally, it's very easy to feel quite tied to some of these cases, because it's happening in our local communities. And it's really important to make sure that we're taking care of our own well-being. And if, you know, sort of a virtual peer support supervision hasn't been set up, then just making sure that we're making time to actually sit down and talk to our peers about some of the experiences that we're having when we're taking these calls. Is that all right, Najnin?
That's great. Thank you so much, Layla, for all of that. I think just a few takeaways from what you, Barbara, and Hadrian have said. Absolutely, I think there's a big element of sort of telephone calls is our voice, and that is our power, and that's the tool that we'll be using. And I think you know, therefore, those active listening skills, if you've already had motivational interviewing training, do utilize those techniques into your assessment. And then just what you've just said about, yeah, the welfare of our own sort of health and well-being, that's equally as important. And so we just really need to be mindful. Like, if you know that you're having a really tough day, and you know that you're going to speak to some really tough sort of conversations, then make your team aware of it. You also need to keep yourself safe, just as we need to keep the patient safe. And then just to say also, the script the telephone script is very exhaustive. You don't have to go through every single question bullet point that I've mentioned. It's just making sure that there is some sort of general structure and some sort of general needs assessment that you're capturing, so that you can provide the appropriate support and, more importantly, the immediate support that will be needed. So now I think Leanna is going to have some questions ready for all our panelists. And so, Leanna, do you have questions for all of us?
So we've got a couple to kick us off. So given the importance of non-verbal communication, what techniques would you recommend to build rapport on the phone? And I think maybe this should go to Barbara, who, you know, who's been working in this field, doing social prescribing, relying on kind of the ability to build rapport on the phone in this particular work for years. It'd be great to hear from you, Barbara.
Hello. Yeah, well, I think, you know, I think Hadrian really summed it up really well as well. And, you know, my background is also in helpline. I worked for bereavement helpline as one of my previous experiences. And it is really about building that space and time. Really just one important thing that Hadrian mentioned is silence, you know, not being afraid to maybe leave gaps, and by doing so really create a space for the person to open up a bit more, and really just, you know, using those minimal encouragers, like, you know, just little yeah, you know, they know you're there. And you kind of get the feel of it. I'm sure Hadrian can talk much more about it than me. You know, it's about you get a feel that the person listens to you. You know, they need to know that you are there, basically. You know, and sometimes that's all that person needs. One thing maybe to mention that as people open up, they might get distressed or they might get emotional. I mean, you probably are familiar with the scenario that more that they tell you, and as Hadrian mentioned, maybe first time they've told somebody like this, hearing it say for them can be actually a very big thing. So even though it's not, you know, not suicide, something else about their life that maybe they haven't told anyone else. So people do get emotional or tearful, and it's just, which can be distressing for you. So it's good to acknowledge it and give people time. So it's just, you know, if somebody is crying, it's good just to say, it's okay, take your time, I'm here, or take as much time as you need, you know, and give them that space maybe to, you know, to get over the worst and that they are ready to continue.
Could I ask a question? What do you do? Obviously, as a social prescriber, you have perhaps a certain amount of, you have a session that you're doing with a client. What do you do if you're getting into some difficult conversation, but your session is due to come to an end? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, so that's it might be that, and you can feel it on yourself often, that there's been so much offloaded, and you're thinking, what can I do maybe to offer some suggestions or solutions. Sometimes if a phone call is really long and heavy going, it is okay not to be too ambitious and just take it as a, you know, they just offload it and there will be a follow-up. You have to remember that there can always be a follow-up. So it's good just to take, we've shared really a lot today, and thank you for sharing. And maybe we can continue that later. So I think not to feel under the pressure that you have to cover the whole assessment questions, but, you know, maybe rounding it up and saying we will have to finish soon in next 2-3 minutes, but thank you for sharing, and we can schedule a follow-up. That's what we would do.
Layla, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Thanks, Barbara. That was really helpful. Yeah. Layla, is there anything you'd like to add? You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I think I just echo what Barbara said, really. I think the reality is that what we need to understand is that we are going to be dealing with more and more challenging cases and conversations. And I think for me, it's really important, and I keep going on about sort of the aspect of well-being for the person that's taking the call. But what we need to understand is, whilst people are sharing their experiences, those experiences might be experiences that you yourself have gone through. And so that's going to raise a lot of sort of anxiety issues within yourself. I think in terms of keeping the structure, it's what we find really helpful is just sending reminders to people. Just say, you know, hey, just to let you know, we've got about 10 more minutes, or, you know, we've got about 5 more minutes. And if you need to schedule in another conversation with them, then that's a topic then possibly you can sort of go back to in the next conversation. So yeah, no, but exactly what Barbara said.
And Hadrian, did you want to come in? Did you have anything else to add?
On the building trust question, is that?
Yeah, how to build rapport over the phone. I mean, you talked a little bit about active listening, but was there anything else that you wanted to underline?
Definitely active listening is a huge part of building trust. When a caller feels that they are being listened to completely, that is going to build trust. Just that feeling and that experience is going to do amazing things. The other thing that came to mind for me is just being very clear about what you're offering, what you're there, and what you can do, what you can't do, not over-promising, and yeah, just making sure that that's very clear and there at the very beginning for them. We always find that our reputation actually does a lot for us, and people know what to expect from the Samaritans before they call. So as the service goes on longer and longer, that will obviously start to play a role as well. Yeah, that's it.
I've got a question that I'll put to all of you, so just stick your hand up if you feel that you've got something you'd like to say about it. Right now, the voluntary sector, the voluntary services are really sort of under fire. There's organisations, places that you would normally be referring link workers onto. Places that you would normally be referring your clients onto might not be operating anymore. How are you managing referrals at the moment, and what sort of things are you referring them onto when you're having some of these difficult conversations over the phone?
So Leanna, do you mean the services that we're referring people onto, or how exactly. We're managing that?
You're working over the phone, you're getting to a referral. How do you go about organising that referral and making sure that it's happening? If you're not seeing that person, you know, seeing them face to face and following up, all of that.
I think this is where, like, following up your conversations are really, really important. It's vital to make sure that you've penciled in time to catch up with that individual. I think in terms of referrals and, you know, services ending, we've been really lucky, because I think in a time of a crisis for us, it seems like organisations are kind of coming together and there's a lot of joint working and support. And so we've been working really closely with you know, people like the community navigators to pull together all of the resources that we have, and we've started to create a bit of a directory. I think it's important as well to mention that whilst this crisis is happening, there are a lot of organisations that are cropping up, and there's continuous change of service. So it's really, really important that link workers are continuously doing their research and asset mapping of what's going on in the local area, because just from my own experience, what I've been finding is that, you know, at the moment, the way that our food banks is changed, the way that our food banks operate is changing. So one day they're delivering food, and the next day, actually, no, they're not doing that anymore. They're actually delivering vouchers. So there's this continuous change. So it's really important that we're constantly updating the information that we have, because that information is changing quite rapidly. But I think getting involved with all of the local groups that are happening, making sure that you're connected with all of the Facebook and WhatsApp groups have been really helpful. Making sure that you're using people like the community navigators and the care navigators that are actually doing a bit of that work as well, and just pulling together all of the resources that you have together to do more of a coordinated approach.
Yeah, so I guess a big part of building rapport is building that trust, is being able to listen to somebody's problem, but then being able to perhaps act on it and refer them to something that is genuinely going to support them on that particular issue that is they're finding tricky. I'm interested, Barbara.
And I think that's just one. Yeah.
Sorry, no, go on. Say.
Sorry, and just to pick up on your point, that before the crisis, we had a sort of a known pool of organisations that we were referring people to, and we did our own vetting and we did our own risk assessments on those organisations. And what's happening now is that you're having a lot of voluntary organisations or individuals actually that are just going out and providing a service. And so it's really important that we continue to do that, that quality assurance and those checks and those vets to make sure that if we are actually referring individuals to services, that they're legitimate and they're going to actually do what they say.
As if you didn't have enough to do already.
It sounds like a lot, isn't it? This is constant searching and approving. And actually, one of the things that I hope we can do in the next couple of weeks in Waltham Forest, because we have been set up as a team with our new link workers in PCNs. And we are so well connected. I think we have to, as you said, Leila, to work collaboratively within a team and maybe look at the different areas of support. So that script that I presented that has a list of possible concerns, So my idea, actually, I haven't told my team yet, is to look at, that everyone could take one or two areas, pick and cover that research around, how domestic violence or exercise from home is covered, and keep an eye on the latest developments, because as you all said, new initiatives, new projects keep emerging. So yeah, it is a big task to keep an eye on evolving landscape of services. We are lucky. It's collaboration, basically. If you can collaborate and share lists, we have in Waltham Forest, we have some voluntary organizations, 6 of them actually, also providing social prescribing. So they compiled their list, which they shared with us, which is great. But it's good to have a bit of coordination with that, isn't it? So people don't search, research things. Yeah.
What's available this week may not be available next week. I'm interested to know, Barbara, what you do when you're sort of in the process of building a relationship with your patients over the phone, and you're struggling to get hold of them. They're not picking up the phone. How do you approach that as an issue?
That can be really difficult, especially for the most vulnerable, homeless people. Often it's very hard. And especially with the homeless one. So I mean, so far our protocol has been, we try to phone 3-4 times, we send text message, we leave a voicemail, but if after 3rd attempt they don't pick up, we send them a letter, which obviously now it's a bit more tricky, because sending letters, we still have Sharon, my manager, goes to the office, so she's been printing some odd letters over the last 2 weeks and sending them off. Actually, I must say that from our experience, for people who are not contactable, letters work quite well. We've had quite a good response. So yeah, that's probably all you can do, isn't it? Try all the channels and hope for the best, really.
Thanks, that's great. I just have a question for Hadrian, actually, slightly changing tact. Speaking to a lot of social prescribers that are doing welfare calls and speaking to shielded patients, I think it's pretty exhausting by the end of the day, just talking on the phone and listening to sort of all sorts of individual different difficult stories. They are sat, normally they'd be in an office making those calls, or having to, having people to debrief with at the end. I'm interested, how are Samaritans tackling this issue? I'm guessing the service is still very much going. People are perhaps working remotely. What is the best way to do peer support remotely, but for those that are on the front line doing this work?
Yeah, the Samaritans has made the call to do everything we can to keep our branches going, exactly for that reason, because the peer support of our volunteers is so important. There's been certain measures taken to create distance between them, but for them to be able to talk to each other when they're in the branch. There is some remote working going on, but it's mostly the text and email services that are happening remotely, and then they're using phone calls and video conferencing as a way to peer support after that. That's been our response so far. I'm not sure there's anything more I can add other than to say that it's been a big challenge, and it's a huge part of making sure that what you offer is sustainable and responsible for the people doing it.
Barbara, how are you guys? I mean, you've got a new team this week. You've had new people starting, as well as a kind of an established team. How are you managing this, to keep the sense of a team going remotely, and sort of ensure that everybody has other people within that gang to lean on?
Yeah, so I mean, one lucky thing was that we started with induction program even before our link workers were in the jobs. So now they're taking some time off. So luckily we had a few face-to-face meetings, all of us. One of them was a lovely day at the Bromley By Bow Centre at one of your seminars. So that was our bonding experience at the Bromley By Bow. And now it's really just keeping in touch via probably my colleagues would agree that the WhatsApp group where they share things. I use my work mobile for that WhatsApp, but sometimes at the end of the weekend I can see 70 messages there, so they do use it well. And I guess it helps, but yeah, scheduling regular meetings, and then we have also kind of a one-to-one meetings, because some of our all of our new link workers, it's their first days in GP practices. It hasn't been consistent, and I must say, depending on each individual PCN director or GP, how much they're buying into social prescribing. Some have been fantastic and are actually giving us ideas how to do things, and we work with some of the GPs really well. Some of them sadly haven't even had time to meet with the new link worker, although we've been trying to set up a meeting with one particular PCN director for I think 5-6 weeks now. So it's a mixed bag, and it is difficult, but the peer support is obviously it's even more important in this situation.
Anything you wanted to add, Layla, about peer support in an age where you're doing it all over the phone?
I think, yeah, echo what Barbara said. I mean, the peer supervision is essential, I think, especially in a crisis that we're dealing with now. I mean, we're doing peer supervision weekly now. So I'm giving sort of link workers the opportunity for all of us to kind of bring one difficult conversation that we've had and how we've dealt with it. So that's what we're doing. But we also get clinical supervision every month, so we're really lucky. So we get the opportunity to speak to a therapist about some of the challenging conversations that we've had and what emotions have arisen due to that. It's really important to talk, and I think that question is a great question, because I feel exactly the same way. I'm one of those people that, like, I'll come back from having a session and I just want to offload over a cup of tea with my team members, and I really miss that. I really miss that opportunity to connect with people and to talk about sort of my day at work. And I think that you know, as much as we can, we should try to kind of, even if it is just having, you know, coffee mornings with our colleagues where we're not actually talking about work and we're just sort of talking about what's going on for us and what Netflix show we're watching. I think all of that sort of stuff is even more important now to give us a sense of normality in this really weird world that we're living in at the moment. So yeah, Netflix reviews coming up weekly.
Will be where can we follow what you're watching?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pass back to, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but I'm going to pass back to Najnin, who can yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and just very quickly before we wrap up, and most of you might be aware of the Good Sam's app, the NHS volunteer service. I think there was a question about whether those volunteers are DBS checked. So my understanding is that they do have some form of ID checks. And then on the screen you should see an NHS volunteers number. So if there are any queries, or if there's any, you can contact that number directly. How it works is that I've just given you the link. You would need an NHS email account to make the referrals, but that might change soon, so do keep an eye on the website. And then you will be sent in login details, and apparently you can track the referrals that you make, so whether they've actually had the support service delivered to them. And then there was a question about mutual aid groups. I think there's some hesitation about, again, DBS checks. It's just making sure that our patients are safe. So I think just follow guidance on your organisations. I think some organisations are saying rather than we would make the referral as link workers, you would just maybe make that suggestion to the patient itself and be like, there's this mutual aid group. If you're interested, here's their number, or the Facebook details. There will be a survey, very quick 5-question survey just about today, because today is a pilot session, and so any thoughts, further questions that you have, please be honest in the comments. There's a free text box in the survey. And then I just want to say, maybe because it's a bank holiday weekend, just making sure that you guys all focus, this is proper homework by the way, make sure you focus on a really good self-care exercise where you really do get the chance to relax, and it's really, really important that we keep ourselves healthy and safe. And I just wanted to say a big, big thank you to everyone who's logged in to watch this and spend nearly 2 hours of your time. I hope it's been useful. Please be very honest in the comments about which further areas you'd like further support in. My hope is that I could develop a series of training for all link workers, and that's my passion, is just to make sure that link workers feel supported. And I think it's just really important in this crisis. And so I want to say thank you to everyone that's joined, and also our panelists. So Barbara, thank you so much. Hadrian, thank you so much. It's really valuable having an external service provider sort of perspective, and some really practical tips about how we manage those really difficult conversations. And then to Layla as well, giving us an update on what's happening, and some best practice ideas as well. So I will leave. I think that's it, unless the other panelists have anything else to add. There was my email address available, so if there are any queries, you can contact us, either me or Leanna. And as I said, if there's anything that you feel like that's affecting your role as a link worker, do utilise Leanna, who is the regional learning coordinator for London. And her contact details were up on the screen as well. So I'm going to leave you now. Thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely bank holiday. Bye guys. Thank you.
Thank you.